The millionaire's mother froze when she saw her lost son's childhood photo in the plumber's hand. The late September afternoon cast long shadows across Victoria Blackwood's marble staircase as she descended slowly, her fingers trembling around an old photograph. 22 years she'd kept it hidden in her nightstand drawer. 22 years of looking at those two identical faces, both smiling, both wearing small silver star pendants around their necks. Her twin boys, Edward and the other one, the name she could barely whisper without her chest tightening so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling of the main parlor, each drop echoing through the silent mansion like a countdown. A pipe had burst somewhere in the walls. Old buildings in the Upper East Side had their quirks, even the expensive ones. Clara, her housekeeper, had called an emergency plumber. Victoria hadn't paid much attention. Her son Edward was in Manhattan, running his empire of luxury hotels and construction firms. She was alone, as always, wrapped in memories that felt more real than the present. When the doorbell rang, Clara hurried to answer it, and he walked in. Victoria looked down from the second-floor landing, and her heart stopped. The man carrying the toolbox had Edward's face, the same dark eyes, the same thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. A childhood accident she remembered with painful clarity. He wore a worn blue work jumpsuit, his hands calloused and rough, but his posture, the way he held himself, it was identical to the son she'd raised among privilege and private schools. And then, she saw it, hanging from his neck, resting against his sweat-stained shirt. A silver pendant, a star, exactly like the one Edward wore. Victoria's legs gave out. She grabbed the banister, unable to breathe. That pendant. She'd bought 2 of them 32 years ago, when the twins were born, one for each son, a symbol of eternal protection, the jeweler had said. But one of them had disappeared 22 years ago, that terrible day in a crowded Brooklyn mall. Victoria had lost one of her sons in the chaos of shoppers. She'd screamed until her voice gave out, searching every store. Every corner, the NYPD had investigated for months. Nothing. It was like the earth had swallowed her 10-year-old boy whole. Edward, the twin who remained, had never fully recovered. He grew up quiet, carrying the guilt of having let go of his brother's hand. Now, 22 years later, that man stood there, in her home, wearing the impossible pendant. The plumber looked up and met Victoria's frozen stare. For a second, something passed between them, a wordless recognition, an ancient pain neither of them understood. "Ma'am, are you okay?" His voice was rough, uncertain. Victoria couldn't answer. She just descended the stairs slowly, moving like someone walking through a dream. "That necklace," she murmured, her hand shaking as she pointed. "Where did you get it?" The man touched the pendant, surprised by the question. "Oh, this. I've had it since I was a kid. Don't know who gave it to me. Honestly, I grew up in foster homes, never knew my parents." The words hit Victoria like stones against her chest. Foster homes, since childhood. Never knew. The world tilted. Clara rushed to steady her, but Victoria remained standing, her eyes locked on the plumber's face. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice breaking. "James. Just James. James. Not Blackwood." He didn't know who he was. Didn't know he had a mother. Didn't know he had a twin brother. Didn't know that for 22 years, Victoria had cried herself to sleep every single night, praying he was alive somewhere, somehow. And now here he was, alive, grown, with Edward's face. With the pendant she'd placed around his neck when he was barely a year old, Victoria reached out and touched his face. James pulled back, startled, but something in his eyes shifted, like a distant memory trying to surface from deep shadows. "Sorry. Ma'am, I'm just here to fix the pipes." "No." Victoria took a deep breath, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You didn't come here just for that. You came because fate brought you back." At that moment, the front door swung open. Edward walked in, talking on his phone, wearing an impeccable suit, his posture commanding. When he saw the plumber, he stopped mid-sentence. His phone slipped from his hand and clattered on the marble floor. The two men stood face to face, identical, like reflections in a mirror. Edward took a step forward, his face draining of color. his eyes wide with disbelief. What? What is this? Victoria covered her mouth, sobbing. Edward, I think I found your brother. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. James looked between them. Confused, his toolbox still in hand, Edward stared at him, then at the pendant around James's neck, then at his mother. That's impossible, Edward whispered. He's been gone for 22 years, Victoria finished. I know, but look at him. Edward, look at his face. Look at the pendant. Edward moved closer, his breathing shallow. He reached up and pulled his own pendant from beneath his shirt collar. The exact same silver star. He held it up next to James's. Perfect matches. Who are you? Edward's voice cracked. Who the hell are you? James shook his head slowly, overwhelmed. I'm nobody. I'm just a plumber from Queens. I don't understand what's happening here. Clara, Victoria said without taking her eyes off James. Call Dr. Morrison. Tell him we need DNA testing. Immediately. Victoria, wait, Edward started. No. Victoria's voice was steel now, steady despite her tears. I've waited 22 years. I'm not waiting another day, if there's even a chance. Her voice broke again. If there's even the smallest chance that my son came home. I need to know. James looked at the two of them. This elegant woman in her 50s with tears streaming down her face, and this polished businessman who looked exactly like him, and felt something crack open inside his chest. He'd had dreams, since childhood. Always the same dream. A boy just like him. And they were together, laughing, holding hands. He'd never understood why. I'll do the test, James heard himself say. I need to know too. Victoria let out a sob of relief and reached for his hand. James let her take it, and when their fingers touched, something electric passed between them. Something that felt like coming home after being lost for a very long time. Edward stood frozen, watching his mother hold the stranger's hand, and for the first time in 22 years, he felt a flicker of something he'd thought was dead forever. Hope. The DNA test took 3 days. 3 days that felt like 3 years. Victoria had insisted they use the fastest lab in New York. Money no object. Dr. Morrison, the family physician who delivered the twins 32 years ago, handled everything personally. James had given his sample quietly, still looking overwhelmed, then left for Queens without saying much. Edward hadn't slept since that first night. He kept staring at himself in mirrors, wondering if this was what James saw every morning. The same face, the same scar, even the same cowlick on the left side that never stayed down, no matter how much product he used. On the second evening, Victoria invited James to dinner. He showed up wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, clearly the nicest clothes he owned. Victoria had told Clara to keep it simple. No 5-course meals, no intimidation, just family. Except they weren't family yet, not officially. They sat in the smaller dining room, the one Victoria used when she didn't want to feel like she was eating in a museum. Edward arrived late, still in his work suit, his tie loosened. Traffic was hell, he muttered, though everyone knew it was an excuse. Victoria had spread old photo albums across the table. James leaned forward, studying the pictures with an intensity that made Victoria's heart ache. This was your 5th birthday, she said softly, pointing to a photo of 2 identical boys covered in chocolate cake, laughing. You and Edward were inseparable. We couldn't tell you apart half the time. Your father used to joke that we should have tattooed your names on your foreheads. James touched the photo with his calloused fingers. I've had dreams, he said quietly, since I was a kid, about a boy just like me. We're always together, running through a garden, playing with wooden blocks. But I never knew why I kept dreaming about him. Edward's fork clattered against his plate. I have those dreams too. The room went silent. Victoria covered her mouth with trembling hands. You both. You've been dreaming about each other. James nodded slowly. There's this one dream I have all the time. We're in a big room with tall windows, and there's sunlight everywhere. We're building a tower with red and blue blocks, and James looked at Edward. You keep knocking it down and laughing. Edward's face went pale. The playroom, in the Hampton house. We had those blocks. You always built towers. And I always... He couldn't finish. "You were 7 when we sold that house," Victoria whispered. "How could you possibly remember?" "I don't remember," James said. "I just dream it." Victoria pulled out another photo. The shopping mall. The last picture ever taken of them together. 2 10-year-old boys standing in front of a toy store, both wearing their star pendants, both smiling. "This was taken 20 minutes before." Victoria's voice broke. "Before I lost you." She told them everything. The crowded mall in Brooklyn, the back-to-school shopping rush, how she'd turned to look at a display for just 5 seconds. 5 seconds. And when she turned back, Henry was gone. The panic, the screaming, the police, the months of searching, the private investigators who found nothing, the theories, kidnapping, trafficking, murder. None of them led anywhere. Edward was devastated, Victoria continued, tears streaming down her face. He blamed himself, said he'd let go of your hand to tie his shoe. For years, he couldn't even look at himself in the mirror without seeing you. Edward stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to them. "I'm sorry," James said quietly. "I didn't mean to bring all this up. Maybe this was a mistake." "No," Edward turned around, his eyes red. "It wasn't a mistake. If you're really him, if you're really Henry." He took a shaky breath. "Then this is the best thing that's happened to this family in 22 years. James met his gaze. For a long moment, the two men just stared at each other, and Victoria watched something unspoken pass between them. Recognition, connection, brotherhood. "Tell me about your life," Edward said, returning to the table. "Where did you grow up?" James shrugged. "Everywhere and nowhere. Foster homes in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Brooklyn. Never stayed anywhere long. The system kept moving me around. When I was 18, I aged out. Got a job as a plumber's apprentice. Been doing that ever since." "Family?" Victoria asked gently. "I have a grandmother. Adopted grandmother, Mrs. Chen. She took me in when I was 16, kept me even after the checks stopped coming. She's the only real family I've ever known." James paused. "Until maybe now." Victoria reached across the table and took his hand. "The pendant. You said you've always had it." "Yeah. According to my file, I was wearing it when I was found. No one knew where it came from, so they let me keep it. It's the only thing I have from before." "You were found." Edward leaned forward. "What do you mean found?" "A woman turned me into child services in Newark. Said she found me wandering near a bus station. I had no ID. Couldn't remember my name or where I came from. They figured I had some kind of trauma-induced amnesia. I was 10 years old and I couldn't remember anything before that day." Victoria's hand flew to her chest. "Newark. That's only 30 miles from Brooklyn." The weight of that statement settled over the room. 30 miles. For 22 years. James had been 30 miles away. They could have passed each other on the street. Could have been in the same room and never known. Clara appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Blackwood, Dr. Morrison is on the phone. He says it's urgent." Victoria's face drained of color. Edward stood so fast his chair nearly toppled. James just sat there, frozen. "Put him through to the study," Victoria said, her voice barely steady. The three of them walked to the study in silence. Victoria picked up the phone, put it on speaker. "Victoria," Dr. Morrison's voice came through, gentle but clear. "I have the results. And," Victoria could barely breathe, "it's a match, 99.9%. James is genetically related to both you and Edward, Victoria." There was emotion in the doctor's voice now. "James is Henry. Your son came home." Victoria's knees buckled. Edward caught her, and they both sank to the floor together, sobbing. James stood there, staring at nothing, his entire world rewriting itself in an instant. He wasn't nobody. He wasn't just James from Queens. He was Henry Blackwood. He had a mother, a brother, a family. Edward looked up at him through tears and extended his hand. "Welcome home, brother." James took it, and Edward pulled him down into the embrace. The three of them held each other on the floor of that study, crying years of grief and joy and relief into existence. After 22 years, the Blackwood family was whole again. The news spread through the Blackwood family like wildfire. Victoria spent the next morning on the phone, calling relatives, old friends, Anyone who'd been part of the search 22 years ago, her voice shook with each call. "We found him. Henry's alive. He's home." Edward canceled all his meetings for the week. He couldn't focus on quarterly reports or construction contracts when his twin brother, his actual twin brother, was sitting in the breakfast room eating scrambled eggs and looking completely overwhelmed by the silver cutlery. "You can just use your hands if you want," Edward said, watching James struggle with the ornate fork. "I won't tell anyone." James smiled weakly. "I feel like I'm in a museum. Everything here costs more than my rent." "It's just stuff." Edward sat across from him. "Mom's been collecting it for years, filling empty spaces, I think." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two identical men eating breakfast, still getting used to the mirror image across the table. "Do you remember anything?" Edward asked finally. "From before." James shook his head. "It's all blank, like someone took an eraser to the first 10 years of my life. Sometimes I get these flashes, feelings more than memories, but nothing concrete. The doctor said it might come back. Trauma does weird things to memory." Edward paused. "I remember everything, every detail of that day. I remember letting go of your hand to tie my shoe. I remember looking up and you were gone. I remember Mom screaming your name until her voice gave out. I'm sorry," James said quietly. "Don't. It wasn't your fault." "It wasn't anyone's fault." Edward's jaw tightened. "Whoever took you, that's who should be sorry." Before James could respond, the doorbell rang. Clara's voice echoed from the foyer, and then another voice joined. Sharp, polished, skeptical. "Where is she?" "Where's Victoria?" Edward's expression darkened. "Aunt Rosalind." Victoria's younger sister swept into the breakfast room like she owned the place. Rosalind Blackwood was 52 and looked like she'd spent every dollar she had trying to look 40. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Edward, darling." She kissed his cheek, then turned to James. Her smile flickered. "And you must be the long-lost heir." "James," he said, standing awkwardly. "Or Henry." "Still getting used to it." "I'm sure you are." Rosalind circled him slowly, studying him like a painting she was thinking of buying. "Remarkable, absolutely remarkable. You could be Edward's clone." "DNA doesn't lie," Edward said coolly. "Of course not." Rosalind's smile remained fixed. "Though I have to say, what a convenient coincidence. A plumber just happens to show up at the exact house where his long-lost family lives, after 22 years. What are the odds?" James felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I didn't know." "I'm sure you didn't," Rosalind interrupted smoothly. "I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just saying it's quite the stroke of luck for everyone involved." Victoria appeared in the doorway, her face hardening when she saw her sister. "Rosalind, I wasn't expecting you. I came as soon as I heard. My nephew returns from the dead. It's practically biblical." Rosalind turned to Victoria. "Though I'm surprised you didn't call me yourself." "I was going to. I've been busy." "I'm sure." Rosalind glanced at James again. "Well, I'm thrilled for you." "Victoria, truly. Though I hope you're being careful. There are people who would do anything for a piece of the Blackwood fortune." "What are you implying?" Edward's voice was ice. "Nothing at all. I'm just reminding your mother to protect herself. Protect this family. We've already lost so much. We can't afford to lose anything more." The words hung in the air like poison. James felt his face flush. "Maybe I should go." "No." Victoria moved to his side, putting a protective hand on his arm. "You're not going anywhere. You're my son. This is your home." Rosalind's smile tightened. "Of course he is. The DNA proves it. I'm just saying that DNA can be manipulated these days. Technology is so advanced. You hear stories? Get out." Edward stood, his voice deadly quiet. "Edward, I said get out. You've made your point. Now leave." Rosalind looked at Victoria, waiting for her to intervene. Victoria said nothing, just kept her hand on James's arm. "Fine." Rosalind collected her purse with exaggerated dignity. "I'll go, but Victoria, please think about what I said. Be smart about this. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment." She left in a cloud of expensive perfume and subtle menace. James sank back into his chair, his hands shaking. Maybe she's right. Maybe this is too fast. I should go back to Queens. Give you guys some space to... Stop. Victoria sat beside him, taking his hands in hers. Don't let her get in your head. She's always been like this. Jealous. Bitter. She's never forgiven me for marrying Theodore. For having this life, she thinks I'm a con artist. She thinks everyone's a con artist because she would be one if she had the chance. Victoria squeezed his hands. You are my son. The DNA proves it. Your face proves it. Your dreams prove it. Everything about you proves it. But what if... No what ifs. Edward came around the table. You're my brother. I feel it here. He pressed his hand to his chest. I've felt incomplete my entire life. Like half of me was missing. And now you're here. And for the first time in 22 years, I feel whole. James looked between them. These two people he barely knew, but who were somehow his family, his mother, his brother. The words still felt foreign in his mind. I don't know how to be Henry Blackwood, he said quietly. Then don't, Victoria said simply. Be James. Be whoever you are right now. Henry was a 10-year-old boy. You're a 32-year-old man. You don't have to become someone you're not. We love you for who you are. But you don't even know me. Then let us get to know you. She smiled through tears. We have time. All the time in the world. Outside, Rosalind sat in her Mercedes, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. She'd worked too hard, planned too carefully. 22 years she'd waited for Theodore's fortune to finally be divided properly. 22 years of watching Victoria play the grieving mother while sitting on billions. And now this plumber shows up, and suddenly there's another heir to split the fortune. No. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. It's me, she said when someone answered. We have a problem. The boy came back. There was a long pause on the other end. I know, Rosalind said, her voice cold. I didn't think he'd ever find his way back either, but he did, and we need to do something about it. She hung up and started the car, her mind already working through the angles. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. James went back to Queens that night. He needed space, air, time to think. The mansion felt like it was closing in on him, all that marble and crystal and history pressing down until he couldn't breathe. Mrs. Chen was waiting up for him when he got home, sitting in her old recliner with a cup of tea gone cold. So, she asked in Mandarin, are you a rich man now? James switched to Mandarin automatically. He'd learned it living with her for 16 years. I'm their son. The DNA confirmed it. She nodded slowly, studying his face. And how do you feel about that? Terrified. Good. That means you're smart. She patted the couch beside her. Sit. Tell me everything. He did. The mansion. The mother who cried when she looked at him. The brother who had his exact face. The aunt who looked at him like he was there to rob them blind. The aunt is right to be suspicious, Mrs. Chen said when he finished. Not of you, but of the situation. People don't just disappear for 22 years and come back. Someone made you disappear? James hadn't thought of it that way. You think someone took me on purpose. You were 10 years old in a crowded mall. You didn't just wander off and forget who you were. Someone took you. Someone dumped you in Newark. And someone made sure you'd never remember where you came from. She squeezed his hand. Your mother needs to find out who, before they try something else. The thought made James's skin crawl. But Mrs. Chen was right. 10-year-olds didn't just develop amnesia and wind up in another state by accident. Meanwhile, across the city in his penthouse office, Edward sat across from a private investigator named Marcus Torres. I need you to look into someone, Edward said, sliding a folder across the desk. James Riley. That's the name he's been using. Grew up in the foster system. I need to know everything. Where he lived, who he lived with, any red flags. You think he's lying about being your brother? Torres asked, scanning the file. No, the DNA is solid, but my aunt planted some doubts. And, Edward rubbed his face, I need to be sure, for my mother's sake. She's been through enough. I'll dig into it. Give me a few days. Edward nodded, hating himself a little. James was his brother. He felt it in his bones, but Rosalind's words kept echoing in his head. What a convenient coincidence. At the mansion, Victoria couldn't sleep. She stood in Henry's old bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been 22 years ago. Toy cars on the shelves, a half-finished puzzle on the desk, drawings taped to the walls. She'd kept it like a shrine, unable to let go. Clara found her there at 2 a.m., sitting on the small bed, holding a stuffed dinosaur. "Ma'am, you should rest." "I can't." Victoria looked up, her eyes red. "Clara, I need to know what happened to him. Who took my son? Where has he been all these years?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat beside Victoria on the bed. "I've been thinking about that day," she said carefully. "The day at the mall." Victoria turned to her. "What about it?" "I saw Miss Rosalind there." The room went cold. "What?" "I never said anything because I thought it was just coincidence. But I saw her near the toy store, about 20 minutes before Henry disappeared. She was watching the boys." Victoria stood abruptly, the dinosaur falling to the floor. "Why didn't you tell me this 22 years ago?" "Because I wasn't sure. It was crowded. I only saw her for a second. And she's your sister. I didn't want to accuse her of something terrible without proof. But now," Clara met her eyes, "now your son is back, and she's already trying to discredit him. Now I think maybe I should have trusted my instincts." Victoria's mind raced. Rosalind at the mall. Rosalind watching the boys. Rosalind, who'd always resented Victoria's marriage to Theodore, who'd been bitter when Theodore's will left everything to Victoria and the children. Could her own sister have orchestrated this? The next morning, Edward drove to Queens. He'd looked up James's address, a fourth-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that looked nothing like the Upper East Side. He climbed the stairs and knocked. James answered in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking surprised. "Edward, what are you doing here?" "Can I come in?" The apartment was tiny but clean. Mrs. Chen sat at the kitchen table, eyeing Edward with obvious suspicion. "I'm Edward," he said to her. "James is Henry's brother?" She said something in Mandarin. James responded, and she softened slightly but didn't leave. Edward sat on the worn couch. "I wanted to see where you lived, who you are, not the DNA. I believe that, but you as a person." James sat across from him, wary. "You're checking me out." "Yeah, I am." Edward didn't apologize. "My mother's been hurt enough. If there's any chance you're not who you say you are. The DNA doesn't lie." "I know, but people do." Edward leaned forward. "So tell me, no mansion, no mother watching, just us. Who are you, really?" James held his gaze. "I'm a plumber. I make $48,000 a year. I've got $1,200 in my checking account and about $5,000 in savings. I live in this apartment with the woman who saved my life when I was 16, and the state didn't give a damn about me anymore." He gestured around the small room. "This is it. This is everything I have. So if you think I'm after your money, you're wrong. I don't need it. I don't even want it. Then why come to the mansion at all? Why agree to the DNA test?" James was quiet for a moment. "Because I've spent my whole life feeling like something was missing. Like I was supposed to be somewhere else, with someone else. And when your mother looked at me," his voice cracked slightly, "no one's ever looked at me like that before. Like I mattered. Like I was wanted." Edward felt something shift in his chest. He understood that feeling, the absence, the emptiness. He'd lived with it for 22 years. "I'm sorry," Edward said. "I had to ask. I get it. You're protecting her. I'm protecting all of us." Edward stood, then hesitated. "Come to the office tomorrow. I want to show you something." "What?" "The business. What we do. Who we are beyond the mansion and the money." Edward headed for the door, then turned back. "You're my brother, James. But you're also a stranger. Let's fix the stranger part." After Edward left, Mrs. Chen spoke in Mandarin. "I like him. He's protective, smart. He thinks I'm a con artist. No, he's making sure you're not. There's a difference." She poured more tea. "The question is, who made you disappear, and are they still out there?" James touched the pendant around his neck. The one constant in his chaotic life. Someone had taken a 10-year-old boy, erased his memory, and dumped him in another city to be forgotten. Who, and more importantly, why? Victoria hired the best private investigator in New York. Daniel Grant had worked for the FBI for 20 years before going private, specializing in cold cases. If anyone could find out what happened to Henry, it was him. They met in her study 3 days after James's return, Grant spread files across her desk. Police reports from 22 years ago. Witness statements. Security footage that had long since degraded. "I've been through everything the NYPD had," Grant said. The official conclusion was stranger abduction, but they never found any leads. No witnesses. No security footage of the actual disappearance. It's like he vanished into thin air. "But he didn't," Victoria said. "Someone took him. Someone who knew how to avoid cameras." "Agreed. And whoever it was dumped him in Newark 3 days later with induced amnesia. That's not random. That's calculated." Grant pulled out another file. "I've been looking into anyone who might have had access to the family. Anyone with motive. And your sister's name keeps coming up." Victoria's blood ran cold. "Clara told you she saw Rosalind at the mall." "She did. But there's more." Grant slid a bank statement across the desk. "These are Rosalind's accounts from 22 years ago. Look at September 15th. Victoria scanned the page. A withdrawal of $50,000 in cash. 2 days before Henry disappeared. Grant continued. Then another withdrawal a week later. $25,000. Both cash. Both from accounts she'd kept hidden from the family. That doesn't prove anything. Maybe she was making a purchase. Maybe. But I also found this." He showed her a grainy photo. Security footage from a parking garage near the Newark bus station. September 18th, 3 days after Henry disappeared. The image was blurry, but Victoria recognized the car. Rosalind's silver Mercedes. The same one she still drove today. She was in Newark, Victoria whispered. The same day a woman matching her description dropped off a confused 10-year-old boy at Child Services. Grant's voice was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Blackwood, I think your sister orchestrated your son's kidnapping." Victoria felt the room spin. She gripped the edge of the desk, breathing hard. Why would she do that? "I was hoping you could tell me." Victoria thought back to the years before Henry disappeared. Rosalind had been bitter about Theodore's will, about the prenup that left her with only a small trust fund. She'd made comments, jealous, cutting remarks about Victoria's perfect life and her perfect children. But to kidnap a child, her own nephew— "I need proof," Victoria said. "Hard proof, before I accuse my own sister of this. I'm working on it, but there's someone else we need to talk to." Grant pulled out another file. "The man who received the cash. I've been tracking financial records, and I found payments made to a Marcus Chen. He was a fixer. Did odd jobs for people who wanted things handled quietly. Nothing violent, mostly moving packages, arranging transport. He's retired now, lives in Chinatown. Can you find him?" "Already did. Question is, will he talk?" Victoria stood, her jaw set. "Let's find out." Marcus Chen lived above a dumpling restaurant in a cramped studio that smelled like ginger and soy sauce. When Grant and Victoria knocked, he answered warily, his face lined with age and regret. "Mr. Chen?" Grant said, showing his credentials. "We need to talk about a job you did 22 years ago." Chen's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Rosalind Blackwood paid you $75,000, Victoria said, stepping forward. "To take my son." Chen looked at her, really looked at her, and something crumbled in his expression. "I didn't hurt him. I swear to God I never hurt him." Victoria's knees went weak. Grant caught her arm, steadying her. "Tell us everything," Grant said quietly. "And we'll see about immunity." Chen let them in. The story spilled out like poison from a wound he'd been carrying for decades. Rosalind had approached him through mutual acquaintances. She wanted a child relocated, not harmed. She'd been very clear about that. Just taken somewhere far away where he couldn't be found. She said the boy was being abused, Chen said, his voice shaking, that his mother was dangerous, that she needed to get him away. I believed her. God help me. I believed her. "Where did you take him?" Victoria could barely speak. "The mall in Brooklyn," she told me when they'd be there, pointed out the boys. "I waited until the crowds got thick, then I grabbed him, had a cloth with some chloroform, just enough to keep him quiet, drove him to a doctor she'd paid off, someone who could mess with his memory. Drugs, I think? Maybe hypnosis? I don't know the details." Victoria felt sick. "Then what?" "I kept him sedated for 3 days while the memory stuff took hold. Then I dropped him at child services in Newark with fake paperwork saying he'd been found wandering. Rosalind said he'd get adopted, have a better life. Chen looked at Victoria with haunted eyes. I didn't know she was lying. I didn't know until years later, and by then, what could I do? The boy was gone. You could have come forward, Grant said coldly. And say what? I kidnapped a kid on her orders. They'd have locked me up and thrown away the key. She had lawyers, money, connections. I had nothing. Chen turned to Victoria. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry. I thought I was helping him. Victoria wanted to scream, to rage, to destroy something, but she just stood there, trembling with a fury so profound it paralyzed her. Her sister, her own sister, had done this, not for money. She'd spent money to make it happen, for revenge, for cruelty, because Victoria had what Rosalind wanted and Rosalind couldn't stand it. I need you to testify, Victoria said, her voice like ice. Against Rosalind. I need you to tell the authorities everything. She'll deny it. Her word against mine. Not if we record her admitting it. Grant pulled out a small device. Mrs. Blackwood, how do you feel about wearing a wire? Victoria looked at the investigator, then at Chen, then at the photo of Henry she'd been carrying in her purse for 22 years. Set it up, she said. I'm going to make my sister confess. Back at the mansion. Edward was showing James around the corporate offices when his phone rang. It was Torres, the private investigator he'd hired. I've got your background check on James Riley, Torres said. You're not going to believe this. What? His entire history checks out. Foster homes, jobs, everything. But I found something else. Financial records show that the woman who dropped him at child services in Newark received a payment of $25,000 2 days later. Guess who made the payment? Edward felt his blood freeze. Who? Your aunt? Rosalind Blackwood? Edward nearly dropped the phone. James, seeing his expression, stopped mid-sentence. Are you sure? Edward demanded. Positive. I've got the bank records, Edward. Your aunt is the one who kidnapped your brother. Edward hung up and looked at James, his face white with rage. We need to call Mom, right now. What's wrong? Everything, my aunt. She's the one who took you. She's the reason you were gone for 22 years. James stared at him, unable to process it. The elegant woman who'd looked at him with such suspicion wasn't just protecting the family fortune. She was protecting herself. Victoria sat in her study, staring at the wire Grant had given her. It was small, barely visible, designed to clip under her blouse. In 2 hours, Rosalind would arrive for their weekly lunch, a tradition Victoria had maintained for years despite the growing distance between them. Today, that tradition would end. Edward burst through the door, James right behind him. Mom, we know, Edward said, his voice shaking with fury. Torres found the payments. Rosalind paid the man who took James. Victoria nodded slowly. I know. Grant found him. Marcus Chen. He told us everything. James stood frozen in the doorway, his face ashen. She really did it. Your own sister kidnapped me. Not just kidnapped. Victoria's voice was cold, controlled. She paid someone to erase your memory, to dump you in another state like you were garbage, all because she was jealous of my life. Edward slammed his fist against the wall. We're calling the police right now. No. Victoria stood, picking up the wire. Not yet. We need her confession. Chen's testimony might not be enough. He's a criminal with everything to gain from a deal. We need Rosalind's own words. You're going to wear a wire. James looked horrified. That's dangerous if she finds out. She won't. Victoria's jaw was set. I've known my sister for 52 years. I know exactly how to make her talk. Grant entered with his equipment. We'll have backup outside. The moment you give the signal, we come in. What's the signal? Edward asked. I'll say I need you to leave now. When you hear that, it means I have what I need. Edward didn't like it, but he recognized that look on his mother's face. Victoria Blackwood had made up her mind. An hour later, Rosalind arrived in her Mercedes, perfectly dressed as always. She kissed Victoria's cheek. Oblivious to the recording device hidden beneath her sister's silk blouse, they sat in the sunroom, Clara serving lunch. Victoria had insisted they eat alone. No staff, no interruptions. You look tired. Rosalind commented, sipping her wine. All this drama with the long-lost son must be exhausting. His name is Henry, Victoria said quietly. And he's not drama. He's my child. Of course. Rosalind's smile was plastic. I'm just worried about you. This whole situation is so unprecedented. A stranger shows up claiming to be family. The DNA proved he's family. DNA can be faked. Victoria, you know that. Rosalind leaned forward. I'm only saying this because I love you. What if someone planned this? What if they found a man who looks like Edward, planted fake DNA results, created this whole elaborate scheme? Victoria felt rage building but kept her voice calm. Why would anyone do that? For the money, obviously. The Blackwood fortune is worth billions. People have done worse for less. True. Victoria set down her fork. People have done terrible things for money or revenge or jealousy. Something flickered in Rosalind's eyes. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm just thinking about Henry's kidnapping. How strange it was. How perfectly executed. How someone must have known exactly where we'd be that day. Exactly when to strike. Rosalind's hand tightened around her wine glass. The police investigated. They found nothing. I know. Which means whoever did it was very careful, very connected, had resources. Victoria met her sister's eyes, had money to pay people off. Victoria, I hired a private investigator, Rosalind, the best in New York. The color drained from Rosalind's face. Why would you do that? Because I needed to know what happened to my son. Who took him? Who destroyed my family? Victoria's voice was steel now. And you know what he found. Rosalind stood abruptly. I should go. Sit down. I don't have to listen to this. Sit down. Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. Unless you want me to call Edward in here right now with what I know. Rosalind sat slowly, her hands trembling. Victoria pulled out the bank statements, the photos, the timeline. She laid them out one by one on the table between them. September 15th, 22 years ago, you withdrew $50,000 in cash. September 17th, the day Henry disappeared. September 20th, another $25,000. All cash, all untraceable. Victoria's voice shook. The same amounts Marcus Chen received for kidnapping my son. Rosalind's face went white. Who? Don't play stupid, Marcus Chen. The man you hired to take Henry from that mall. The man you paid to erase his memory and dump him in Newark like he was nothing. You can't prove. He confessed everything. Victoria's composure finally cracked. He told us about the doctor you hired, the drugs, the fake paperwork. He's willing to testify in exchange for immunity. Rosalind's hands shook so badly she had to set down her wine glass. He's lying. He's just trying to save himself. Your car was spotted in Newark the day Henry was dropped off. You were there, Rosalind. You made sure the job was done right. Tears started streaming down Rosalind's face, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who'd been caught. You don't understand, she whispered. You've never understood. Then make me understand. Victoria leaned forward. Explain to me how you could do this to a child, to your own nephew, to me. Because you had everything. Rosalind's voice rose, all pretense falling away. Theodore, the mansion, the money, the perfect children. And what did I have? Nothing. I was the younger sister, the one nobody wanted. I had to watch you live this fairy tale life while I got scraps. So you stole my son. I wanted you to suffer. Rosalind was sobbing now, mascara running down her face. Just for once, I wanted you to know what it felt like to lose something, to hurt the way I hurt every single day. He was 10 years old. I didn't want him hurt. I made sure Chen wouldn't harm him. I thought he'd get adopted, have a normal life. I just wanted him away from you. Victoria stood, her whole body shaking. You destroyed 22 years of his life. 22 years of my life. Edward's life. You ripped apart this family because you were jealous. I'm sorry. Rosalind reached for her, but Victoria stepped back. Victoria, please. I'm sorry. I was young. I was bitter. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were 30 years old. You knew exactly what you were doing. Victoria's voice was ice. And the worst part, you've had 22 years to come forward. 22 years to tell the truth. But you didn't. You watched me grieve, watched Edward blame himself, and you said nothing. I couldn't. Don't you see, by the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. I tried to find him, I swear, but Chen had hidden him too well. Liar. Victoria's hand connected with Rosalind's face before she could stop herself. The slap echoed through the sunroom. Rosalind held her cheek, staring at her sister in shock. I forgive you, Victoria said, her voice deadly calm. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to let go of this poison. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. She walked to the door and opened it. Grant stood there with 2 police officers. I need you to leave now, Victoria said to Rosalind. Rosalind's eyes widened as she saw the officers. Victoria, no. Everything you just said was recorded. Every confession, every admission. Victoria's eyes were dry now. Her grief transformed into something harder. You're not my sister anymore. You're the woman who destroyed my family, and you're going to pay for what you did. The officers moved forward. Rosalind tried to run, but there was nowhere to go, as they led her away in handcuffs. Rosalind looked back one last time. I really am sorry. Victoria said nothing. She just watched her sister disappear, feeling nothing but a terrible, hollow relief. It was finally over. The mansion felt different that morning. Colder somehow, like the walls themselves knew what was coming. Victoria stood in the main drawing room, the same room where she'd hosted countless charity galas and family gatherings. Today, it would serve a different purpose. Today, it would be a courtroom. She'd called everyone. Edward and James stood by the fireplace, their identical faces grave. Clara sat near the door, pale but resolute. Marcus Chen, looking 10 years older than his age, sat in the corner with Grant, the private investigator. 2 police officers waited in the foyer, out of sight but ready, and Rosalind's lawyers, 3 of them, expensive suits and leather briefcases, occupied the couch, looking supremely confident. They didn't know about the recording yet. Rosalind arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, punctual as always. She swept in wearing Chanel, her armor of choice. When she saw the assembled group, she stopped. What is this? Her voice was sharp, defensive. Sit down, Rosalind, Victoria said quietly. I will not, if you're going to ambush me with some kind of intervention. Sit down. Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. Something in her tone made Rosalind comply. She sat in the wingback chair across from Victoria, her lawyers flanking her like bodyguards. Victoria nodded to Grant, who began distributing folders to everyone in the room. These are bank statements, Victoria said. Yours specifically from 22 years ago. Rosalind's face remained impassive, but her hands tightened on her purse. September 15th, you withdrew $50,000 in cash, Victoria continued. September 20th, another $25,000, both from accounts you'd kept hidden from the family. So it's my money. I can withdraw whatever I want. True, but it becomes relevant when those exact amounts match the payments made to this man. Victoria gestured to Marcus Chen. Marcus Chen, the man you hired to kidnap my son. The room went silent. Even Rosalind's lawyers looked shocked. That's absurd, Rosalind said, but her voice wavered. I've never seen this man in my life. Really. Grant pulled out a photograph. Grainy but clear enough. Rosalind and Chen standing outside a coffee shop in Brooklyn. The date stamp read, September 14th, 22 years ago. This was taken the day before Henry disappeared. One of Rosalind's lawyers leaned forward. Where did you get that photograph? Private security camera. The shop's owner kept the tapes in storage. Took some digging, but we found it. Rosalind's face had gone white. This is a setup. You're fabricating evidence. I wish I was, Victoria said, her voice breaking. I wish this was all some terrible mistake, but it's not, is it? She nodded to Grant again. He pulled out more documents. Phone records showing calls between Rosalind and Chen's burner phone. Witness statements from people who'd seen them together. And finally, Chen's full written confession. Mr. Chen has agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. Grant said, he's prepared to tell the court everything. How you contacted him, what you paid him to do. The doctor you hired to drug Henry and induce amnesia. The fake documents you created to hide his identity. He's lying. Rosalind stood abruptly. He's just trying to save himself. Then explain the bank transfers, Edward said coldly. Explain the photographs. Explain why you were in Newark the day James was dropped off at Child Services. I wasn't. Your Mercedes was caught on security footage at a parking garage 3 blocks from the facility. Grant displayed another photo. Same license plate, same car you still drive today. Rosalind looked at her lawyers desperately. The head lawyer stood. My client is not saying another word without. Your client already said plenty. Victoria pulled out a small recording device and placed it on the table between them. Rosalind's face crumbled. What is that? Our lunch last week. When I wore a wire. When you confessed everything. Victoria's hand hovered over the play button. Do you want me to play it in front of everyone? Or do you want to tell the truth yourself? The lawyers erupted in objections about illegal recordings and inadmissibility. But Victoria ignored them. She pressed play. Rosalind's voice filled the room, clear and damning. I wanted you to suffer just for once. I wanted you to know what it felt like to lose something. Victoria stopped the recording. The silence was deafening. James had his hands clenched into fists, his whole body shaking. Edward looked like he wanted to put his fist through the wall. Clara was crying silently. Rosalind sat frozen. All color drained from her face. Why? James's voice cut through the quiet. Why would you do that to a child? To your own nephew? Rosalind didn't answer. Couldn't answer. You destroyed my life, James continued, standing. I spent 18 years not knowing who I was, being shuffled from home to home, never belonging anywhere. And you did that. You chose that for me. I didn't want you hurt, Rosalind whispered. I just wanted. You wanted my mother to suffer. You got your wish. James's voice was ice. She suffered for 22 years. So did Edward. So did I. Are you happy now? No, I'm not happy. I've never been happy. Rosalind's mask finally cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face. I've spent my entire life in Victoria's shadow. Everything I had, she had better. Everything I wanted, she got. The perfect husband, the perfect children, the perfect life, and I had nothing. So you stole my child. Victoria stood, her voice rising. You took a 10-year-old boy and destroyed his life because you were jealous. I thought he'd be better off. I thought he'd get adopted by a normal family. Have a normal life. Liar. Edward slammed his hand on the table. You didn't give a damn about his life. You wanted Mom to hurt. That's all you ever wanted. Rosalind sobbed, makeup running down her face. I'm sorry, God. I'm so sorry. I was young. I was stupid. I didn't think. You were 30 years old, Victoria said. You knew exactly what you were doing. And you've had 22 years to come forward. 22 years to tell the truth. But you didn't. You watched us suffer and said nothing. What was I supposed to do? Come forward and go to prison. Yes. Victoria's voice echoed through the room. That's exactly what you should have done. You should have confessed. You should have helped us find him. Instead, you let me believe my son was dead. You let Edward live with the guilt. You are a monster, Rosalind. Rosalind looked at her sister, her lawyers, the police officers who had now entered the room. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I forgive you, Victoria said suddenly, her voice calm now, deadly calm. Everyone stared at her. What? Rosalind looked up, confused. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I can't carry this hatred anymore. It's poisoning me. Victoria walked to where Rosalind sat. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. You committed a crime, you destroyed lives, and you're going to pay for it. She turned to the police officers. Arrest her. Victoria, please. Rosalind reached for her sister's hand. Victoria stepped back. You're not my sister anymore. You're the woman who kidnapped my son. That's all you'll ever be to me now. The officers moved forward with handcuffs. Rosalind's lawyers protested, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was read her Miranda rights as her hands were cuffed behind her back. I really am sorry, Rosalind said as they led her toward the door. For whatever that's worth. Victoria said nothing. She just watched her sister being led away in handcuffs, feeling nothing but a terrible, hollow relief. When the door closed, the room exhaled collectively. James sat down heavily, his head in his hands. Edward went to him, putting a hand on his shoulder. Victoria stood by the window, watching the police car drive away with her sister inside. "Is it over?" James asked quietly. "The legal part is just beginning," Grant said. "But the truth is out." "That part's over." Victoria turned from the window. Her sons looked at her, waiting. "It's over," she confirmed. "Finally, after 22 years, it's over." And for the first time since that terrible day in Brooklyn, Victoria Blackwood felt like she could breathe. 3 months after Rosalind's arrest, the Blackwood family was still healing, but the wounds were beginning to close. The legal proceedings had been swift and merciless. Rosalind's lawyers tried every angle: diminished capacity, temporary insanity, statute of limitations. But the recorded confession was ironclad. She pled guilty to kidnapping, conspiracy, and child endangerment in exchange for a reduced sentence: 15 years in a federal prison. Her assets were seized to pay restitution to James and to cover the massive legal fees. The media had a field day. Billionaire's sister orchestrates nephew's kidnapping. Dominated headlines for weeks. Reporters camped outside the mansion. James couldn't go to work without being mobbed. Edward had to hire additional security for all the Blackwood properties. But slowly, the circus died down. The family closed ranks and focused on what mattered, rebuilding what had been broken. James, he still thought of himself as James more often than Henry, had officially been recognized as Henry Theodore Blackwood, with all legal rights restored. His birth certificate was corrected. His social security number was updated. Legally, James Riley ceased to exist, but the man remained. He stood now in the study of the mansion, looking at documents his lawyer had prepared: trust funds, stock portfolios, real estate holdings. His share of the Blackwood fortune came to just over $800 million. The number made him physically ill. "You don't have to take it," Edward said from the doorway. "You could refuse the inheritance." "And do what? Go back to fixing toilets and pretending none of this happened?" James shook his head. "That life's gone, Edward. The moment I walked through that door, everything changed." "So what are you going to do?" James was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, really smiled. For the first time in months, something good, something that matters. 2 weeks later, James held a press conference at the mansion. Victoria and Edward stood beside him as he announced the creation of the Henry Blackwood Foundation for Children in Foster Care. "I spent 18 years in the system," James said, his voice steady despite the cameras. "I know what it's like to age out at 18 with nothing, no family, no support, no safety net. This foundation will provide housing assistance, education scholarships, mental health services, and job training for young adults transitioning out of foster care. No kid should have to go through what I went through." The initial endowment was $200 million, a quarter of his inheritance. The response was overwhelming. Applications flooded in. Other wealthy families pledged matching donations. Within a month, the foundation had helped 50 young people find housing and jobs. Victoria watched her son, both of her sons, work tirelessly on the project and felt something she hadn't felt in 22 years. Complete peace. Edward, too, was changing. Spending time with James had shown him a world he'd never really seen. The struggle, the uncertainty, the way most people actually lived. It humbled him in ways business school never had. He called a board meeting at Blackwood Properties. "We're redirecting resources," he announced to the confused executives. 20% of our luxury hotel properties will be converted into transitional housing for homeless families, partnering with the Henry Blackwood Foundation and similar organizations. "That's going to cost us millions in lost revenue," the CFO protested. "Good. We have billions. It's time we used some of it to actually help people, instead of just making more money we don't need." Edward's voice was firm. "My father built this company on the idea that everyone deserves a home, somewhere along the way. We forgot that everyone doesn't just mean people who can afford 5-star accommodations." The board grumbled but complied. Edward Blackwood was the majority shareholder. What he said went. The first Blackwood transitional housing facility opened in Brooklyn, 3 blocks from the mall where Henry had disappeared. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. At home, life found a new rhythm. James split his time between the mansion and Queens, unable to fully leave behind Mrs. Chen or the neighborhood that had raised him. Victoria didn't push. She understood he needed to stay connected to James while learning to be Henry. Clara was promoted to estate manager with a substantial raise and a generous bonus. Her loyalty and eventual honesty had saved the family, she cried when Victoria handed her the check. "I should have told you sooner," Clara said, wiping her eyes, "about seeing Miss Rosalind at the mall. You told me when it mattered," Victoria said gently. "That's what counts." Family therapy sessions happened twice a week. Dr. Sandra Morrison, no relation to the family physician, specialized in trauma and reunification. The sessions were painful, necessary, and slowly effective. "You can't erase 22 years, doctor," Morrison told them in one session. "But you can build new foundations. Henry and James aren't the same person. Edward and the brother he remembers aren't the same people. Victoria, you're not the same mother. Accept that. Grieve what was lost. Then focus on what you have now." It was good advice. They tried to follow it. James started having dinner at the mansion 3 times a week. He taught Edward how to fix a leaky faucet, how to change a tire, how to navigate a subway without looking like a tourist. Edward taught James about investment portfolios, business strategy, and which fork to use at formal dinners. They laughed about their differences. They argued about sports teams. James was a Mets fan, Edward loved the Yankees, and their debates got heated. They discovered they both hated Brussels sprouts and loved old westerns. Slowly, tentatively, they were becoming brothers again. Victoria watched them one evening, sitting in the library, arguing about whether the good, the bad, and the ugly was better than high noon, and felt tears prick her eyes. "You okay, Mom?" Edward asked, noticing. She nodded, smiling through the tears. "I'm more than okay. I'm complete." James stood and crossed to her, pulling her into a hug. Edward joined them, and for a moment, the 3 Blackwoods just held each other. "I love you both," Victoria whispered. "So much." "Love you too, Mom," they said in unison, then looked at each other and laughed. Outside, the October sun was setting over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside the mansion that had been silent for so long, there was finally life again. Laughter, arguments, love, a family, broken and rebuilt, learning to be whole. Mrs. Chen visited once a week, always bringing homemade dumplings that she insisted Victoria's chef could never replicate. Victoria learned to make tea the way Mrs. Chen liked it. The 2 women from completely different worlds found common ground in their love for James. "You raised a good man," Victoria told her one afternoon. "You gave birth to him." Mrs. Chen replied, "We both made him who he is." It was true. James was a product of both worlds, the privilege he was born into and the struggle that shaped him. He was stronger for it. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Edward raised his glass. "A toast," he said, "to second chances, to family, to finally being whole, to coming home," James added, touching his pendant. "To love that survives everything," Victoria finished, her voice thick with emotion. They clinked glasses, and in that moment, the past 22 years felt a little less heavy. The wounds would scar, but they would heal, and that was enough. 6 months had passed since Rosalind's confession, and the Blackwood family had found something they hadn't known in over 2 decades. Normalcy. James, Henry, whoever he was on any given day, had finally stopped feeling like an imposter in the mansion. He'd moved into one of the guest suites permanently, though he kept his apartment in Queens. Some mornings he woke up to Mrs. Chen's dumplings, others to Clara's elaborate breakfasts. He existed between 2 worlds and had learned to be comfortable in both. The foundation was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. They'd helped over 300 young adults transition out of foster care, providing housing, education, and job training. James worked there full-time now, no longer fixing pipes, but fixing systems that had failed kids like him. Edward had surprised everyone, including himself. The luxury hotels converted to transitional housing were actually profitable. Not as profitable as before, but enough to sustain themselves. More importantly, they were making a real difference. Families who'd been living in shelters or cars now had safe places to rebuild their lives. "Dad would have liked this," Edward said one morning, standing with James outside the Brooklyn facility. He always said business should serve people, not the other way around. I wish I'd known him, James said quietly. Me too. He would have loved having you back. Edward paused. He never got over losing you. Mom wasn't the only one who grieved. They stood in silence for a moment. Two brothers mourning a father one barely remembered, and the other missed every day. Victoria had transformed as well. The woman who'd spent 22 years frozen in grief had become an activist. She'd joined boards for missing children's organizations, testified before Congress about improving foster care systems, and donated millions to causes that helped vulnerable families. "You're famous now," Clara teased one morning, showing her a magazine article titled, "Victoria Blackwood, From Tragedy to Triumph." "I'm not interested in fame," Victoria said, but she smiled. "I just want to make sure no other family goes through what we did." The three of them had dinner together most nights now, sometimes at the mansion, sometimes at small restaurants in Queens where James felt more at home, occasionally at Edward's penthouse. They'd developed routines, inside jokes, the kind of casual intimacy that comes with actual family. "You chew too loud," James told Edward one night. "You talk with your mouth full," Edward shot back. "You're both disgusting," Victoria said, laughing. "But you're my disgusting sons, so I suppose I'll keep you." These moments, ordinary, mundane, beautiful, were what Victoria had dreamed about for 22 years. Mrs. Chen had become an unofficial part of the family. She joined them for Sunday dinners, teaching Victoria how to make proper dumplings while complaining that her kitchen was too fancy to make real food. "You need a wok that's been used for 20 years, Mrs. Chen insisted. "All this stainless steel is useless." Victoria bought a well-seasoned wok from a restaurant supply store in Chinatown. Mrs. Chen approved. The media attention had finally died down. Occasionally, a reporter would try to get an interview, but the Blackwoods had learned to say no. This was their life now, not a story for public consumption. James had even started dating a social worker named Maya, who worked with the foundation. She knew his whole story and didn't care about the money. She liked James, the plumber from Queens who happened to be a billionaire's son. "She's good for you," Edward said when James brought her to dinner. "She calls you out on your bullshit, like someone I know." James grinned at his brother. Edward had also met someone, a civil rights attorney named Sophia, who challenged him intellectually and didn't let him get away with privileged thinking. Victoria liked her immediately. "Finally, women who can handle my sons," she joked. Life wasn't perfect. James still had nightmares sometimes, fragmented memories of the kidnapping trying to surface. Edward still battled guilt, even though therapy had helped him understand it wasn't his fault. Victoria still woke up some mornings expecting it all to have been a dream, but they had each other now. That made everything bearable. One Saturday afternoon, the three of them went to Central Park, something they'd never done together before. They walked the paths, fed the ducks, acted like any other family enjoying a spring day. "I used to come here after you disappeared," Edward said, sitting on a bench overlooking the lake. "I'd imagine you were still alive somewhere, living a normal life, having fun. I hoped you weren't suffering." "I wasn't," James assured him. Mrs. Chen made sure of that. "I mean, it wasn't easy, but I was okay. I'm glad." Edward's voice was thick. "I couldn't have lived with myself if you'd been suffering the whole time." Victoria sat between them, taking both their hands. "You're both here now. That's what matters." "Do you think you'll ever forgive Rosalind?" James asked suddenly. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I already have, but forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. What she did was unforgivable, even if I've chosen to forgive her." "Does that make sense?" "Yeah," James said. "It does." They'd received a letter from Rosalind the previous month. She was in prison, attending therapy, claiming she'd found God and was truly sorry. She wanted to see Victoria, to apologize in person. Victoria had thrown the letter away. "Maybe someday," she'd told her therapist, "but not now, not for a long time." As the sun began to set over the park, painting everything in gold, James felt something he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing it. Belonging. He belonged here, with these people, in this family, not because of DNA or money or obligation, but because they genuinely loved each other. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" Victoria asked. for not giving up, for searching for me. Even when everyone said I was gone, for believing I was still out there. Victoria squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. I'm your mother. I'll never give up on you, either of you. Edward leaned his head on her shoulder. We're pretty lucky, aren't we? The luckiest, Victoria agreed. They sat there until the streetlights came on. 3 people who'd been broken by tragedy and rebuilt by love. The past would always be part of them. The loss, the grief, the 22 years of absence. But the future was bright. The future was theirs. As they walked back toward the mansion, James and Edward walking slightly ahead, Victoria watched her sons laugh about something stupid, shoving each other playfully, and felt a peace so complete, it was almost overwhelming. Her family was whole. Her sons were home. And after 22 years of darkness, there was finally, blissfully, light. She pulled out her phone and took a picture of them, silhouetted against the twilight sky. 2 identical figures, walking side by side, brothers, together, home. She sent the photo to Clara with a simple message. Look at my boys. Clara's response came immediately. Beautiful, just beautiful. Victoria smiled, pocketing her phone, and hurried to catch up with her sons. There was still so much time to make up for, so many memories to create, so many ordinary moments to treasure, and she intended to cherish every single one. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered with chandeliers and promise. The Henry Blackwood Foundation's first annual gala had drawn over 500 guests, philanthropists, celebrities, politicians, and most importantly, the young people whose lives the foundation had changed. James stood at the podium in a tuxedo that still felt foreign on his body, looking out at the sea of faces. Victoria sat at the front table, radiant in emerald silk, Edward beside her, proud and protective. Mrs. Chen had refused to wear a gown but had compromised on an elegant pantsuit. Maya squeezed James's hand as he stepped up to speak. A year ago, James began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I was just a plumber from Queens. I had no idea who I really was, where I came from, or that I had a family searching for me. I thought I was nobody. He paused, looking at Victoria, who was already crying. But I was wrong. I wasn't nobody. I was somebody's son, somebody's brother. I was Henry Blackwood, even though I didn't know it. And more importantly, I was one of thousands of kids in this country who grow up in foster care, who age out of the system with no support, no family, no safety net. The room was silent, hanging on every word. This foundation exists because I got lucky, because fate, or God, or whatever you believe in, brought me home. But there are so many kids who don't get that chance, who never find their families, who struggle alone. James's voice grew stronger. We can't save everyone, but we can help. We can provide housing, education, support. We can show these young people that they matter, that someone cares, that they have a future worth fighting for. The applause was thunderous. James stepped back, overwhelmed, as Victoria stood and embraced him. Your father would be so proud, she whispered. I am so proud. The evening continued with dinner, dancing, and a silent auction that raised over $3 million. Edward gave a speech about Blackwood Properties' commitment to affordable housing. Several foundation beneficiaries shared their stories, their voices strong and hopeful. As the night wound down, James stood near the balcony, watching the crowd. He'd come so far from that day he'd walked into the mansion to fix a pipe. His entire world had been rewritten. Excuse me. He turned to find a young woman standing behind him. She was maybe 20, with dark hair and eyes that seemed oddly familiar. She held herself nervously, clutching a small purse. Hi, James said, smiling. Are you enjoying the gala? It's beautiful. I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. She hesitated. I was in foster care too, in New Jersey mostly. I aged out 3 years ago. Did you apply to the foundation? We can still help. No, that's not why I came. She pulled something from her purse. An old photograph, faded and creased. I wanted to show you this. I found it in my file when I turned 18 and got access to my records. James took the photo. It showed a group of children in what looked like a recreation room, and there, in the back, was a boy who looked exactly like him at maybe 11 or 12 years old. Beside him, a tiny girl, maybe 2 years old, holding his hand. "That's you," the young woman said softly. "And that's me. We were in the same facility for about 6 months, Hamilton House in Newark. You were kind to me. The older kids usually ignored the little ones. But you played with me, read me stories." James stared at the photo, something stirring in his memory. A little girl with dark eyes, a stuffed rabbit, reading Goodnight Moon over and over because she loved it. "I remember you," he whispered. "You had a rabbit." "Mr. Hops," her eyes filled with tears. "You do remember. What's your name?" "Sophie. Sophie Chen." James's heart stopped. "Chen. I was adopted by a family named Chen when I was 3. They gave me their last name." She paused. "But my birth name was different. My mother abandoned me at a hospital when I was born. Left no information except a first name. Sophie. No last name. No records. Nothing." Victoria had noticed James talking to the young woman and approached, Edward and Mrs. Chen following. "James, is everything okay?" James turned to his mother, the photo still in his hand. "Mom, this is Sophie. We were in the same foster home for a while." Victoria looked at the girl, and something in her expression changed. She went very still, staring at Sophie's face. "How old are you?" Victoria asked quietly. 21. "Why?" Victoria's hands started to tremble. She looked at the photo, then at Sophie, then at Edward. "Edward, look at her eyes." Edward studied Sophie's face, and his expression mirrored his mother's shock. "Those are Rosalind's eyes." The words hung in the air like a bomb. Sophie looked confused. "Who's Rosalind?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "My sister, James's aunt, the woman who orchestrated his kidnapping." She took a step closer to Sophie. "When is your birthday?" "April 3rd, 2004. Why?" Victoria swayed, and Edward caught her arm. Mrs. Chen, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up in Mandarin to James. "Ask her who her adoptive parents were." James translated the question. Sophie answered, "Michael and Linda Chen. They live in Jersey City. They've been wonderful, but they never knew anything about my birth family, just that I was abandoned." Victoria pulled out her phone with shaking hands, scrolling through old files. She found what she was looking for. A private investigator's report from years ago. One she'd commissioned to learn everything about Rosalind's life. There it was. April 2004. Rosalind had taken a mysterious medical leave for 3 months. No explanation given. She disappeared from New York entirely. "Oh my God," Victoria breathed. Rosalind had a daughter she abandoned. The pieces fell into place like a terrible puzzle. Rosalind, bitter and jealous, had gotten pregnant. Rather than face the shame or the responsibility, she'd given birth in secret and abandoned the baby at a hospital. Sophie's face had gone white. "Are you saying that woman who kidnapped James is my mother?" "We'd need DNA to be sure," Edward said, his lawyer brain kicking in. "But the timeline fits, the eyes, the circumstances." "I don't want her to be my mother," Sophie said, her voice breaking. "I don't want to be related to someone who could do something so horrible." Victoria stepped forward and took Sophie's hands. "Listen to me. You are not defined by who gave birth to you. You're defined by who you are, by the choices you make. Your adoptive parents raised you with love. That's what matters. But if she's my biological mother, then you're my niece," Victoria said gently. "Which means you're family, real family, not the DNA kind. The kind that actually shows up and cares." Sophie started crying. Victoria pulled her into an embrace, and James joined them. Then Edward, then Mrs. Chen. 5 people, connected by tragedy and fate, holding each other in a ballroom full of strangers. "Welcome home, Sophie," Victoria whispered. "Welcome to the family." Sophie sobbed into Victoria's shoulder. 21 years of questions finally finding some kind of answer. The gala continued around them, but the Blackwood family stood in their own bubble of grief and hope and complicated love. James looked at his mother holding this girl who was somehow his cousin, and felt the weight of it all. The kidnapping, the lost years, the twisted motivations that had led to so much pain. But he also felt hope, because Sophie had survived. He had survived. They'd both made it through the darkness and found their way to this moment. "We'll figure this out," Edward said quietly. "Together. Like everything else." Victoria nodded, still holding Sophie. Together. As the orchestra played and the city lights twinkled through the plaza's windows, the Blackwood family stood united, broken and rebuilt,